Hello guys. So the purpose of this video is going to be to review the concepts that you need to know for your test that's coming up. Um, I'm going to start with characteristics of living things, then we'll move on to cell theory, and then experimental design. What are the characteristics of living things? We know that there are 8 of them that all living things must have in order for them to be called living things. And we use this acronym called Mrs. Gren. In your test, I would like to first of all ask you to remember that M here stands for metabolism and not movement. So M stands for metabolism, meaning that all living things must be able to metabolize. R for respire, stimulus, growth and development, reproduction, excretion, homeostasis, and nutrition. Each one of them, we can look at them slightly, slight details, very small details. We don't need to go into depth because you don't need to know them in depth except for homeostasis. So when we get to the slide on homeostasis, I'll kind of break them down because that's a very important part of the whole lesson we've covered this year. What's metabolism? Metabolism is basically a series of chemical reactions that takes place in a cell. All living things have the ability to metabolize, and they undergo metabolism in order for them to produce things like energy or ATP and all that. Respiration. All living things must have the ability to respire, and respiration for us as humans means that we take in oxygen and we produce carbon dioxide. And the purpose of respiring is also to produce energy. So respiration and metabolism sometimes could have the same purpose, but in terms of metabolism, you could have multiple chemical reactions for different purposes going on in the living cell. So try not to confuse both of them. Response to stimulus is very understandable when the temperature is hot in the environment, wherever you are, like it is very hot right now in Dubai, you tend to feel that. And the reason you can feel it is because your body is able to respond to changes in the environment. So that's an example of respiration. In this figure here, what you see is a person who's touching a hot plate, and he is able to withdraw his hand because he has the ability to respond to stimulus. His response is basically withdrawing his hand, and the stimulus is basically this sensing the heat from the plate, how hot the plate is. Growth and development is basically the ability for something to grow in terms of size or to change its form, right? So a very clear example in this figure here is a larva or larvae that is turning into a butterfly. So that's an example of growth or development. Another example of growth that we've seen is when we looked at mitosis. Mitosis happens as a means for living things to grow. So if you look at a fetus that was in a mother's womb, it grows on to become an adult and a human being like you and I, and that's an example of growth. And this happens as a result of mitosis, so which we looked at earlier during the course. Reproduction is the ability for a living thing to produce younger ones. All right, so this is a very clear example. A kitten is the baby of a cat, right? Human beings make babies. Chicken, because I love chicken. Chicken is produced by other chickens, right? I don't know if that makes any sense. You don't have to laugh at this joke, but it's just a joke. Anyways, there are different kinds of reproduction. You don't have to know this for the course. All you have to know is that reproduction is the ability for a thing or a cell or a living thing to produce its exact copy or produce an identical copy of itself, right? To produce younger ones. Excretion is the removal of waste. And I apologize for the figure. You all have the slides, so you're able to locate the slides and know what it's basically saying there. So removal of waste, different living things have the ability to remove waste. Here is an example of a kidney. Your kidney is meant to be used to remove waste from your system or from your blood, and it does this by removing urea and some other waste, and that's what you go out to pee in the toilet. Okay, homeostasis. Homeostasis is a very important concept, and we've looked at this when we looked at feedback mechanism, which I'll create a separate video for this concept. But for now, homeostasis is the ability of a living thing or a cell to maintain a stable internal environment. All right. So in this reading, what it says here is the ability of a body or a cell to maintain condition of equilibrium or stability within the internal environment when dealing with external changes. So examples are changes in temperature of the environment. When the weather is hot, your body would undergo some processes that would try to make sure that your internal core stays at 37 degrees. And so when the environment is hot, your body would try to release heat by sweating, and also that sweat helps to cool off your system, and that way your body stays constant temperature. There are other examples of homeostasis, but these are this is one of the examples I can give you right now. Nutrition: all living things require nutrients in order for them to grow, to reproduce, and to survive, right? So you need to eat, you need to make sure that you're living healthy, you're staying healthy, because your cells need all of those nutrients. Your body needs those nutrients to function. And so we need to take in those nutrients in order for you to grow and develop and carry out all the bodily functions that you have to carry out. And that's basically the last one. The next concept is cell theory. Cell theory states that all living things are made up of cells, and if it's a one cell organism, we call it a unicellular organism. It's many cells, we call it multicellular. What you do need to know and memorize or understand is that all cells can only come from pre-existing cells. So that's a very important concept in the cell theory, that all cells that currently exist had come from a pre-existing cell. And all of life is made up of cells. So that's a very important concept that you need to understand. You might have a multiple choice question on this. Which of the following characteristics will determine if a thing is alive or not? So here are the options, and I'd like you to pause the video and just decide what you think it is. So if you picked metabolism, the answer is correct. So all of these other things are not part of the 8 characteristics of living things. The only one that fits within the 8 characteristics would be metabolism. So that would be the answer to this question. Next concept is experimental design. In experimental design, we looked at things like the independent variable, the dependent variable, the controlled variable, and we defined what those were, and we gave some examples in class. And you guys have actually even conducted an experiment in class where you wrote down a lab report and you had to define some of these things. So I'm not going to dwell too much on this. I just want you to see this picture right here, experiment 1, experiment 2, and experiment 3. And you can see from these 3 pictures that in the first condition, experiment 1, there is no fertilizer added, but there's every other thing like the sun, the water, and the plant is the same in experiment 1, 2, and 3. So if your question is asking you what is the controlled variable, I apologize for that. If your question is asking you what is a controlled variable, it's very obvious that the controlled variable would be sun, application of water, the plant, of course, it's the same kind of plant that we're using in all of the 3 conditions, the pot, the type of soil. All of these are examples of controlled variables. What would be a dependent variable? A dependent variable, before we go into dependent variable, what's the independent variable? From this example, you can see that the first one, which is the control, has no fertilizer, but in the second and the third one, you have fertilizer A, fertilizer B. So these are 2 different kinds of fertilizers, and therefore they are the independent variables. The independent variables are the variables that we are changing, right? So the variables that change in the experiment are called the independent variables. Now, you can also call the independent variables the cause. And with every cause, you would have an effect, right? So in this case, if you look at the difference between experiment 2, and experiment 3, you can notice that there is a difference in the height of the plant. Okay, so the only possible reason why the height of the plant is different is because of the change in the type of fertilizer. So we changed the type of fertilizer, and therefore we had a very higher growth of plant in this third experiment. Right, and this is another example of a question that we looked at in class, so you can always go over these examples and review them for your test. Thank you very much. I hope you found this very helpful, and that's all I have for this material.